honorable speakers, dear colleagues, and participants. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. I am Sumnima Ghemire, a research associate at the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand, your host for today. Cities across ASEAN are increasingly exposed to intensifying climate risks, with rising temperatures and extreme heat emerging as one of the most pressing threats. Today's webinar, Urban Heat Management for Climate Adaptation and Resilience, is organized by the CLARE-ASEAN initiative led by the Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. This webinar aims to provide insights on the state of urgency of urban heat issues and discuss emerging evidence and practical experiences on addressing it in ASEAN cities. Let me begin by briefly outlining the structure of the webinar. So today, we have divided webinar into 5 segments. In the first segment, we will begin with a welcome address from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office FCDO. Following this, remarks will be delivered by the CLARE-ASEAN project lead at the Asian Institute of Technology, who will provide context for the CLARE-ASEAN initiative and introduce us to today's webinar. In the second segment, we will have a keynote presentation to set up the scene for today's webinar, which will be presented on the urgency, options, and practices towards heat-resilient cities. In the third segment, this will be followed by a panel discussion. So for the third segment, we will have a discussion with the panel around heat management options and their efficacies in ASEAN cities. So after the panel discussion, we will open the floor for an audience Q&A session. This will be an opportunity to ask questions, share reflections, and engage with our speakers. Lastly, we will conclude the webinar with the key takeaways from our project leads and closing remarks from the International Development Research Center, IDRC. So before we begin, let me quickly share a few housekeeping points. Please note that speakers' photographs, screenshots, or short video recordings may be taken during the webinar for event documentation and communication purposes. In case you do not want that your profile be highlighted or used for this case, please let us know. Also, the Q&A function will remain enabled on the platform. So if you have any questions or remarks anytime during the webinar, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. The team will then respond to them or take them up during the Q&A segment. We have designed this webinar to be interactive for all participants. Hence, we will also have 3 short polls towards the end of some segments. So the polls will automatically appear on your screen after certain segments. So we encourage all the participants to take part as your responses will be really helpful to enrich today's discussion. So with that, let us begin the webinar. To begin the session with, it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Sin Hilhorst, representing the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO. Mr. Sin is a British diplomat and international development leader, currently serving as the head of climate, energy, and nature at the UK mission to ASEAN in Jakarta. Working within the FCDO, his career spans strategic roles in economic governance, international development partnerships, and regional policy. Mr. Sin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues and friends across ASEAN and beyond. My name is Sean and I'm speaking to you from Jakarta today. On behalf of the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, it's a pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion on urban heat management for climate adaptation and resilience in ASEAN cities. I would like to thank the Asian Institute of Technology, the IDRC, and the wider CLARE-ASEAN team for bringing us together. I also warmly welcome our colleagues from ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change, the ASEAN Secretariat, our keynote speakers and panelists, and everyone joining us online today. First, let me outline the problem we're here to solve. Extreme heat is no longer a distant or occasional risk. Across Southeast Asia, temperatures are rising at the same time as rapid urbanization, dense construction, and the loss of vegetation and water sources. We know that urban heat is not experienced equally. People living in informal settlements, outdoor workers, older people, children, and low-income communities face the greatest exposure with the fewest resources to protect themselves. The 2026 El Niño event is expected to strengthen and can increase the likelihood of extreme heat and drought in parts of Southeast Asia, with wider risks for water, food, health, and livelihoods. Second, I must emphasize that the problem is not just in ASEAN. The UK, my country, has experienced its fifth heat wave of 2026. And in 2022, the UK recorded 40 degrees Celsius for the first time. The Met Office in London has issued red extreme heat warnings for England and Wales this year. While mentioning the Met Office, I should flag their work here in Southeast Asia on downscaling climate models to assess urban heat. In response to conditions in the UK, a national Climate Adaptation, Research and Innovation framework sets out research priorities for how the UK needs to adapt sector by sector. Some will be publicly funded, but a huge amount of research will need to come from the private sector. UK companies face risks, but are also at the forefront of solutions, such as climate risk modelling and analytics, engineering and advisory services. The solutions need scientific evidence to inform planning, investment and implementation, alongside the knowledge and participation of the communities most affected. To give an example from London, evidence indicates that cool roof approaches, as simple as white paint, could reduce outdoor temperatures by 1.2 degrees. Widespread air conditioning, on the other hand, could raise inner city temperatures by as much as a degree. Those answers will be different in ASEAN cities, but the crucial point is that interventions must be based on high-quality research. So third, this brings me to the value of CLARE-ASEAN. Supported by UK aid through the FCDO and co-funded by Canada's International Development Research Centre, the initiative brings together place-based research, regional evidence and policy engagement. Its work spans 14 cities in 7 ASEAN countries, with a clear focus on socially inclusive and practical climate adaptation. We don't assume that one solution will fit every city. CLARE-ASEAN is examining different urban contexts and solutions, including heat-resilient housing, green infrastructure, community-based approaches, and urban planning. The research isn't for its own sake. It produces evidence to help decision makers understand what works and how to take solutions to scale. The real prize here is to integrate heat management into urban planning, financing, and public services, not as an afterthought or short-term response, but as a core planning factor. Today's webinar is an important part of that process. The UK is proud to support the CLARE-ASEAN partnership. We value its focus on locally led and policy-relevant research. I hope today's discussion will produce practical insights that help ASEAN cities become more resilient, especially for those most vulnerable to extreme heat. I wish you a productive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insightful welcome remarks, and sorry for mispronouncing your name earlier. It is indeed a pleasure to have you with us here today. Next, we have Professor Subhaka Dhakal, a professor of energy transition and climate change at the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand, and also a project lead for the CLARE-ASEAN initiative. He will provide an overview of the CLARE-ASEAN initiative and also highlight the importance of this webinar. Professor, over to you.
Yes, very good afternoon, colleagues and friends. I hope you can see my screen. Thank you to Sheen for for saying few words which are very inspiring and very much encouraging to all of us. This initiative, CLARE-ASEAN initiative, which strives to provide evidence for socially inclusive climate adaptation and resilience in ASEAN cities. This project we have been doing for last several months. This is a 2-year action research program with the objective to generate new knowledge and evidences, and also to build the research capacity for understanding, identifying, and enabling urban adaptation and resilience to climate change. As Sheen also mentioned earlier, that socially inclusive solutions are very much into the focus of this initiative. This initiative is, as I said, 2-year action research initiative. focused in ODA eligible ASEAN member states. There are several themes, key themes in this initiative: urban heat, nature-based solution, urban climate financing, and the planning and governance, and of course, gender dimension, inclusivity, and also the role of participatory approach. These are very important cross-cutting elements. They are built over it. So CLARE-ASEAN initiative is built around 4 dimensions. The first and the most important dimension is place-based action research projects in ASEAN cities. We have been carrying out these place-based action research projects in 14 cities in 7 ASEAN member states through 4 cross-country locally led action research projects, which actually involves almost 21 institutions from the ASEAN region. So we name them, acronyms: B Housing, which is about the urban heat; NB CLARE, which is about the nature-based solution; HAMMER, which is about the urban heat; and the CAPE, which is about the climate experiments of the locally led community-based actions. These 4 are locally led cross-country projects. They are built around a number of institutions and many cities in the region. A second important dimension or the pillar of the CLARE-ASEAN is the regional synthesis of research evidences. We are looking at what exists in the scientific literature, also what exists in non-scientific literature in practices. So we are drawing the evidence from those literatures to make a base on what works and what doesn't work in the region for science policy and action. Again, this research synthesis happens along 4 dimensions: nature-based solution, urban heat management, financing for urban climate adaptation, and the efficacies of the planning and governance. Then we blend action research and also the regional evidence synthesis that we did from published literature. Then we blend together. We call it evidence tailoring process to bring the publications and the recommendations for policymakers in ASEAN and the broader stakeholders. And also, let's not forget that this project is an official project endorsed by the ASEAN Secretariat and ASEAN policy processes, including ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change, AWGCC. So we are very much part of the ASEAN political process, and our recommendations will directly also go to the ASEAN process. And of course, the fourth and important pillar is also the region-wide research and policy networking. We have carried out that networking and outreach at the project level in these different cities, different countries, but also at a regional level, working with already existing initiative and some of the high-level regional platform, including AWGCC annual meetings, ASEAN Climate Change Strategic Action Plan 2026-2030 development process, Asia Pacific Adaptation Network APAN Forum, ASEAN Sustainability Dialogue, and a number of other activity. Also, we have tried to align this initiative along IPCC special report on cities and climate change. And also, I'm very happy that 3 of us authors from the IPCC special report on cities and climate change are also here in this webinar. Just quickly, I'll go over our events. We organize regional workshop and dialogue on 12-13 May 2026. We hosted the policy influencing workshop in Bangkok on 22 to 26 June, a few months back. We are hosting other regional workshop on September 14-15 next month. We have plans for the national dissemination events in selected countries. Then there will be a final dissemination workshop in the first week of December. These are the kind of physical events. We are also doing a number of webinars. We started with the webinar on nature-based solution. We recently did a webinar on financing the urban resilient future. Today is the webinar of urban heat. We have a number of other webinars coming, especially on planning and governance, a second webinar on nature-based solution, and also the webinar on participatory approaches. So these are the 4 different regional synthesis reports, which are in the process of drafting. We'll have the draft reports available by next month. Then again, this will be blended with the action research project and this policy evidence tailoring to guide the policy, to recommend policy will be our next stage. And a number of policy brief, a number of other publications will come out at the regional level, but also at the individual project level. So in this quest, this is our third webinar. We had organized 2 webinars already, and today we are here. I think we have very exciting speakers lined up, and let's hear from them. Thank you so much. Back to you, Sumni.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that comprehensive overview of CLARE-ASEAN initiative and introducing us to its important pillars and also sharing those important timelines with us. So before we move into segment 2, we would like to hear from our audience through a short interactive poll. May I request my colleague to please generate the poll? Please give us a minute. Okay, a poll might have now appeared on your screen. Please kindly participate. So we are very excited to know, like, where are you joining us from today? Today, where are you joining us from? Is it from like ASEAN region or other parts of Asia or outside of Asia? About your familiarity with the urban heat management for urban climate adaptation.
Sunima, there could have been the technical glitch, so maybe try again.
Okay, if we are not being able to like vote, maybe we can do it next time. It's okay.
No, it's okay. Now it's okay.
Okay, it's working now. Let's take 2 minutes. Yes, it's really exciting to see that most of our audience are joining us from Southeast Asia, Asian region, and then others from the other part of Asia, and we have some from outside of Asia. About 51% until now are somewhat familiar to the urban heat management for urban climate adaptation concept. Okay, in terms of risk and vulnerability of urban heat, so most of our audience feels that public health and occupational heat stress is one of the most vulnerable sector to urban heat, followed by impacts on informal settlements and vulnerable groups, followed by loss of labor productivity and economic impact, and then energy grid overload from cooling demand. Okay, thank you so much for your participation. I think we can move on. I request my colleague to now stop the poll. Thank you. So before getting into segment two, I would like to request all of our speakers and panelists to please turn on their camera and get ready for a group photograph. Okay, I believe we are done. Thank you so much. With that, we now move to the second segment of the webinar with the keynote presentation from Professor Matthias Roth. Professor Matthias Roth is a professor in the Department of Geography at the National University of Singapore and US. He is an internationally recognized urban climatologist with research specialization in urban microclimates, land atmosphere interactions, and the urban heat island effect, with a strong focus on tropical cities across Southeast Asia. Professor Roth, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me just share the screen. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, perfect.
You can hear me. Okay. Then again, a very warm welcome, everybody. I'd like to start off with thanking the organizers from CLARE-ASEAN for the opportunity to speak here today. So this is the title of the talk actually given to me. And what I will focus on in the next 15 minutes or so is just 4 themes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the urgency of urban heat in Southeast Asia. Who is most at risk? I'm going to explain a little bit how cities amplify heat and then finish off with practical pathways towards cooler, safer, and more resilient ASEAN cities. Okay, why is urban heat now a defining Asian resilience problem? Urban heat is no longer a future risk. It is already affecting health, it's already affecting productivity, it's affecting infrastructure and livability across ASEAN cities or Southeast Asian cities. I use these 2 terms interchangeably. So it's not something in the past, it's something that we are experiencing right now, and it's also something that we're increasingly going to be experiencing in the future. Also, heat is not simply a weather hazard anymore, but it has become a systemic urban risk. And ASEAN or Southeast Asia sits at the intersection of rising heat, high humidity, and rapid urbanization. So there's a storm brewing here for Southeast Asian cities, which are developing very rapidly, which are faced with rising heat, but it's not dry heat, it's humid heat. So the idea is to try to get from risk, which is acknowledged, to action. What can we do about it? And heat resilience starts with understanding how cities produce the heat risk in the first place, by understanding who is most exposed and by understanding who has the least capability to adapt. To help us put everything into a framework, I'm using this very nice simple heat risk framework provided in a study by one of our panelists today, Nagin Nazarian, who published this in 2022. And as we can see, and most of us are probably familiar with some variations of this schematic, the urban heat risks arises when we have a hazard and an exposure and vulnerability that intersect in the middle, and which is termed here the risk of urban overheating. And the risk reduces or decreases as adaptive capacity is strengthened. When we look at these 3 entities, when we talk about hazard, potential hazards are heat waves or urban heat islands. The exposure in this risk framework is the presence of individuals primarily, but also infrastructure. to the hazard. And vulnerability relates to the increased sensitivity or the reduced capacity of the humans or the energy systems or the infrastructure. Another important thing to note is that heat is not just high temperature. It is shaped by humidity, and this is particularly important here in Southeast Asia. It is nighttime heat that is important. Heat is related to the built form. It's related and framed by social inequality, by work patterns, access to cooling, etc. So we're not just talking about high temperature, it's a much more complex beast, so to speak. And in the context of Southeast Asia, the heat problem is a humidity problem as well. The heat risk in Southeast Asian cities is not only about the very high temperatures we're experiencing here, it's also about the high humidity and the combination of the two, which increase the physiological stresses. And this is nicely shown in this simple schematic in the lower left-hand side, where two situations are compared against each other, a hot dry situation and a hot humid situation. In both cases, a person is exposed to very high temperatures. What does the person do? If the temperatures are becoming really high, they start to sweat. Again, that's a physiological reaction in both cases. This works very well in a hot and dry climate context, but it does not work very well in a humid context because the high humidity around us prevents us from efficiently evaporate and therefore cooling ourselves. So when we talk about heat risk assessments in ASEAN cities, in Southeast Asian cities, we have to go beyond using simple air temperature. We have to use something that's more complex, that includes at least humidity, but some other factors as well. So we're talking about looking at wet bulb temperature or wet bulb globe temperature, or even more complicated heat risk indicators such as the UTCID, the Universal Thermal Climate Index. So some of these indices beyond humidity, they also include the effects from radiation and wind. And this is what we have to aim at, to include all the relative or the relevant variables that determine our comfort, our heat risk. To see how severe the situation already is in Southeast Asia, I've downloaded this map from the Globaya Explorer website. This one here shows the very highest WBGT temperatures of the hottest month in the Southeast Asia region based on a reanalysis dataset. The ERA 5 reanalysis dataset averaged over the period of 1994 to 2023. And the darker red the color, the higher the WBGT temperature returned by the ERA 5 reanalysis. And we can see that for most parts in Southeast Asia, apart from the more high-lying areas, the WBGT temperatures are above 31 degrees C. So these are the shades, the color shades, dark red and purple, which reflect temperatures between 31 and roughly beyond 31 degrees C. Just to put this into context, what this means is I'm using here the heat stress advisory for Singapore, which is a Southeast Asian nation and city. When temperatures, WBGT temperatures, which are plotted here, go beyond 31 degrees C, the Singapore government gives out a moderate heat stress warning. If it's beyond 33 degrees C, we talk of a high heat stress. So the maximum WBGT temperatures measured in the past across the region here are already within these ranges, which are considered moderate heat stress and high heat stress. So this is an issue that's existing right now. So looking into the future, the heat baseline is also shifting. As we warm, the Earth is warming. As we know, the Earth is warming. And what's shown here is our observed and projected annual mean air temperatures for Southeast Asia. This is work done by Singapore's third National Climate Change Study V3, which has been produced by the National Environment Agency quite recently in 2024. So this is the mean annual air temperature prediction into the future, which is plotted in orange. And the dark line, the black line, is the observations from the past. And we can see that starting from 1980 onwards, the temperature has been increasing until to the present. And it's projected to increase into the future as well. This is nothing new, but it's always nice to visualize and to see this again. And the projected increase compared to now by the end century is about 1.5 or 1.7 degrees C, and a little bit less by mid-century. The scenario I'm using here, or the scenario I'm highlighting here is the SSP2 4.5 scenario. I could have used the SSP2 8.5 scenario, but that one has been retired by IPCC because it has been found to be implausible. So I think that's quite an interesting, or that's quite an important thing to point out, that also because much of past research has focused on the most severe scenario, which is the 8.5 scenario. But I think we have to go back a little bit and revise some of our estimates and work with the 4.5 scenario more often. So the baseline is shifting, the background temperature is increasing. I want to go forward here, but it's not just the mean temperature that's important, or occasional extreme days. Climate change also means that the increasing or that the frequency, the intensity, duration of heat stress, they're all increasing. And these are data here again from Singapore. In this case, not Southeast Asia overall, just focusing on Singapore from the same V3 study produced by NEA in Singapore here. In terms of the number of very hot days annually, what has been observed in the past is about 21 days per year. So very hot days are days where temperatures are exceeding 35 degrees C. Going forward, again, looking at the 4.5 scenario, that number is projected to increase to 95 by mid-century and 173 by end century. So by end century, almost every second day will be classified as a very hot day. And similarly, if you look at the maximum WBGT temperatures, they will also increase. So the number of days with WBGT above 33 degrees C in the past or right now is about 24 days per year. By mid-century, this is projected to increase to 87 days and 142 days by end century. So for Southeast Asia, it's the combination of background warming, high humidity, rapid urbanization, and then also the outdoor labor exposure, which makes this shift especially consequential, because it's the people working outdoors that are feeling this increased heat exposure first. On top of the global background warming, we have a local climate change, I call it, which is related to the cities themselves, because cities, their presence, they can intensify the heat. So just look at those situations shown here on the left-hand side. It's a natural, it's a riverbed. We have a forest, a natural landscape compared to the one on the right-hand side, which is a downtown area in Singapore here. And obviously, if you look at these two images, it becomes clear, okay, the local climate in the city will be completely different and likely much warmer than on the left-hand side. If you could choose, we would probably like to live on in an environment that's more similar to the one on the left-hand side. And this is the case, the increase in temperature in the city is the case because the city is built with solar radiation absorbing materials, relatively dark materials, which lower the albedo. The materials used in the city, such as concrete and asphalt, they store heat preferentially. We have reduced vegetation, so less evaporative cooling. The dense urban canyons affect the airflow, and they prevent the heat radiation to escape into space. But also we have the production of additional anthropogenic heat due to human activities. And all of this together produces this urban heat island effect, which is shown in the schematic at the bottom. And I want to point out another important thing here. When we talk about the urban heat island, the one that's relevant to human comfort, health risk, is the so-called canopy layer heat island. So that's the heat, or that's the air layer in between the actual street surfaces up to about the top of the buildings. This is where the people are living. This is where our daily activities take place. There are other types of heat islands as well, such as the surface temperature heat island. So the surface itself is warming up as well, is warmer in the city as opposed to the natural surrounding areas. And these two should not be confused. And there are very practical implications and important implications to this as well, because the surface urban heat island or the surface heat island can be relatively easily measured by satellite imageries. So a lot of people use heat maps based on surface temperature, just because it's convenient to get that data on a regular basis. However, that's not the relevant metric for the heat risk assessments. Maybe something we can come back to. I will leave it at here because I could talk much more about this topic. But let's leave it here. It's the canopy layer heat and the air temperature heat, and that's the important metric we have to look at. The heat island is primarily a nighttime phenomenon because the urban materials slowly release stored heat after sunset. So the urban area cannot cool as efficiently as the rural surroundings. And this is shown on the right-hand side in this study from Singapore, done in different types of neighborhoods. In the center of the schematic, so what you see is the urban heat island intensity. So that's a temperature difference between a certain area in the city and a rural background temperature as a function of time. And the time goes from noon to sunset, 1800, midnight, 000, and sunrise again, 06, and then noon again. And this UHI intensity is largest, is biggest at night. And during daytime, the urban areas are actually not much warmer than the rural surroundings. A little bit maybe, or they can even be cooler. A downtown area, CBD area, is actually cooler during daytime than a rural surrounding natural area. And of course, the heat increment, how much higher the temperature is in the urban area, depends on the built characteristics. So the compact high-rise areas are much warmer at night than the open low-rise areas, for example, as shown here. So the temperature can go up to 4 or 5 degrees, this temperature increment at night within the city center. So this night heat is harmful. It disrupts recovery, it disrupts sleep, and raises multiple multi-day heat risks. Also, indoors can stay hot while outdoor areas are cooling down. So that's another important issue to look at. Dense, poorly ventilated homes cool slowly, much more slowly than the outdoor cools. So it's possible at night that, or during daytime as well, that the indoor is much warmer than the outdoors. So the heat health burden is already visible. This is an interesting report, the Lancet Countdown Report 2020 FEAR, which concludes that record high climate-related health threats, including heat exposures, already exist. And the blue line, which shows the percentage change in heat-related mortality of older adults above 65 years as a function of year, is strongly increasing from 1990 to 2020. About a 167% estimated increase during this period. This is what is observed. And research applied to that data set has shown that without the warming, which we're experiencing right now, that increase would only have been 65%. So this is applied to high-risk groups. Who are the high-risk groups? Of course, the older adults, but also the very young ones, the infants, children, pregnant people, people with chronic illnesses, of course, outdoor and manual workers, those who are exposed to the heat directly, low-income households, informal settlement residents. And most of you are probably familiar with this already. Heat is also an economic and infrastructure issue. As urban heat increases, productivity goes down, health costs go up, cooling demands increase, the electricity grid is under more stress, disruptions to schools, etc. So this shows that any response has to be cross-sectoral to be able to reach out to all of these different sectors. So the heat policy should involve labor, health, energy, housing, finance, education, disaster management, and probably others could be listed as well. Also, cooling must be managed. Yes, cooling can save lives, but also increase emissions and waste heat if poorly regulated. As long as cooling, the electricity provided to create cool air is from burning fossil fuels, this will add to the greenhouse gas emissions. Also, air conditioning condensers will emit a lot of warm air, as we know. Or anybody knows who has been standing beside one of these condensing units. So what works? Reduced heat. Oops, excuse me. We should reduce heat at the source. Cooling the city is the first thing we can do and should be doing. And there's a little bit of a toolbox here, what can be done, and possibly more tools could be added here as well. But it's the trees which provide shade and evapotranspirative cooling. It's parks which provide local cool islands and social co-benefits. We can have cool roofs to reflect the solar heat. Streets should be shaded to reduce the radiant heat gain and effects for walkers and cyclists. Artificial shade structures, canopies, arcades, shelter bus stops. Permeable surfaces work as well to reduce stored heat and manage stormwater. Blue spaces, of course, they provide evaporative cooling and thermal respite, and building orientation to manage ventilation and reduce solar gain where desired. But the main thing is also to know here that there is no single silver bullet for this. And all these interventions, or any intervention, must be adapted to the local climate, to the local place, the maintenance capacity of that locality, the water availability. We cannot plant trees and parks if there's no water, etc., etc. So interventions are very local based. I think that's an important point to raise. Of course, what also works is protect people during heat events. So we can have a forecast system with heat alerts based on WBGT maybe, with certain heat thresholds, followed by targeted action, outreach to the vulnerable people, outreach to the affected people, provide cooling spaces, worker protection, and with the result that we have lower exposure of these vulnerable or affected segments of society. What could be some of the practical entry points for ASEAN cities? So a city could start with a heat risk map, run pilots in vulnerable districts of what works in terms of heat health warning systems, providing cool public spaces, try to put all the planning into, or the heat management into initial plans and budgets. And then from these pilots, scale up to something bigger, to the entire city perhaps, which then needs more structures in place in terms of finance, the development of standards which work across the entire city. Things need to be maintained as well. So going beyond demonstration projects to something that can be deployed across the entire city. But again, what I mentioned before, what works depends on context, maintenance, capabilities, etc. For example, a shaded street only works if trees survive. A warning system only works if vulnerable people receive and trust the message. Which brings me to the last slide here, 6 principles for heat-resilient ASEAN cities. I'm sure we can add more, 7, 8, but I like the number 6, so 6 principles for now. Heat resilience requires cooling the place in the first place, designing a place for heat, protecting the people, reducing inequality as much as possible, governance across all sectors, and then importantly, monitoring the outcomes to see if what has been implemented really works. And there is help out there. We don't have to start from scratch. Heat management, which cuts across agencies, has been realized to be effective by other agencies before. I'm just pointing to 3 possible resources here. One is the Heat Health Action Plan guidance developed by the World Health Organization. The World Bank has produced a very nice booklet, Combating Heat in Cities, or GIN, the Global Heat Health Information Network, has produced a report, Extreme Heat Risk Governance. So my last statement here, urban heat is manageable, but only if heat resilience becomes a core city priority. So we have to include heat management at the beginning, from the beginning, at the earliest stage possible. So thank you for your attention. I'll stop here and I'll hand back to the organizers.
Thank you, Professor Roth. Thank you so much for such an insightful presentation. Since our Q&A box is already enabled for all the participants, in case of any questions or reflections regarding the presentation, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box. So before we move on, we will have another poll with the audience. So I would request my colleague once again to please generate the poll. I hope it's visible on everyone's screen by now. Please kindly participate. So in terms of options and interventions for managing urban heat, as we can see, the highest voting is still on the nature-based solution, which is regarded as one of the most important management strategy that can offer highest potential for ASEAN cities. So following that, we have sustainable urban planning and ventilation corridors as of now. Following that, we have passive cooling and then early warning systems and public cooling centers. So about the immediate efforts that is needed to scale up urban heat management in ASEAN cities, as most of the audience is still voting, I can see most of the vote is for policy frameworks on urban master plan and urban master planning. And equal to that, we also have community-led adaptation and public awareness, which is also regarded as the most important efforts needed to scale up urban heat management. Following that, we have city-wide scaling of infrastructure interventions and then neighborhood scale pilot or demonstration projects. Okay, with that, we end our poll to here. Thank you everyone for participating. I request my colleague to end the poll now. Thank you. So with that, we move into our panel discussion. So we are delighted to have 4 distinguished panelists with us today who will take us through an engaging discussion on heat management options and their effectiveness, largely in ASEAN cities. So to moderate the panel, it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Imani Kumar. Mr. Imani Kumar is the Deputy Secretary General of ICLAI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and the founding Executive Director of ICLAI South Asia since 2005. With a background in civil engineering, environmental planning, and environmental management, he brings over 25 years of experience in urban local governance, climate change policy, renewable energy, and sustainable urban development. Mr. Imani, over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Sumima. And I just want to, I hope I'm audible, if somebody.
Yes, you are.
Good. Thanks to Professor and Dr. Matthias. I think a very good, important presentation. I was so happy. I'm thinking that maybe I should use some of the initial information to tell that what we are going to talk about. But Dr. Matthias has clearly presented what is happening in ASEAN cities, what is heat risk means, and what we need to do. And I'm also happy to see the poll results, though I was a little surprised because early warning systems came up as a lost. But in the second question, it came up as public awareness needs to come. Actually, that has come in top 2, I think, if I'm not wrong, those numbers. So I see that there is a need for an action on ground. And I'm happy that I have a very distinguished panel with me to talk about what's happening and also talk about what we can do. And I also requested when I was talking to them previously, where is the finances coming from? Actually, the financing of the actions on ground, because most of the cities in ASEAN countries need finances also to implement some of these actions, what we are talking about. So I don't want to take too much of time, though I will maybe intervene in between because we as an ICLEI also work very closely with more than 300 odd city governments in Asia Pacific region and through our 14 offices in the Asia Pacific region as ICLEI, ICL, Local Governments for Sustainability, which is a city association. So just to give you that, I have 4, as I said, the panelists, Dr. Negin Najarian. She is a professor at University of New South Wales and a lead author of IPCC special report. Welcome, Dr. Negin, for this particular session. And I also have Dr. Emma Ramsey. She's a professor from the fellow at Asian School of the Environment, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. She holds a PhD from Monash University from Australia. Dr. Emma, welcome onto this panel. The third one is Dr. Viswas Chitale. He is a fellow leading the climate resilience team of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, CEW, a premier public policy think tank in New Delhi. Thank you, Dr. Viswas, for joining us. And the last speaker here on the panelist is Ms. Pua Shihui. She is an urban specialist from the World Bank. I request all of you, maybe if you can take 1 minute or 1.5 minutes each, maybe to introduce yourself, our area of work, either through one slide, maybe I request you, and then we can have a discussion on that. For that, may I ask Dr. Negin, professor from New South Wales, Australia?
Right. Thank you for the introduction. What I'm going to talk about is very well matched with what Matthias already has given us some introduction. And I've divided it into 2 components. It's a great pleasure to be here and talk to you about what we know, but also I wanted to talk about how that knowledge and evidence base goes into planning and responses. So in the 1 minute that I'm given, I want to just give a narrative of how we go across very different scales and very different phenomena. That's what we see on the left side, how we introduce the evidence base coming from global trends, bringing it into the regional context, because we know they all have very different regional components of extremes and different climate and meteorology in them, and then bringing it further down to the local urban scales, making sure that we understand how our urban environments are quite different in different fabric and forms of the cities. And then finally, being able to provide evidence of what does that mean for people? What does that mean when they're in very different contexts? Let's say people who are working in different factories and manufacturing versus if you're visiting a hospital or a shopping mall. What does that whole spectrum of interaction with the cities mean? So that's our first work, is really providing that evidence base. But what becomes then really important is the part on the right, how that evidence goes into local decisions. And I've categorized it here in 4 areas. I know that Matthias liked 6, but I'm giving 4 here. But I actually think there's quite a lot of overlap with what was already mentioned. There are some long-term plannings that are really about how do we actually reduce urban heat. And these are, again, some are at the large scale of global climate actions, all the way to how we also design for people to adapt. And then we come to more timescales that are shorter or more about the heat extreme responses, community outreach, and more about the awareness and response that we need to have when we are faced with some of those extreme events where the heat is here. We just need to respond to that. So I'm hoping I can Then throughout the QA that we have later, I can then provide more specifics of what does that mean to provide these evidence and how we can put it into action.
Thank you, Doctor. May I ask now, Dr. Emma, if you can introduce yourself
Thank
again.
you so much. Very happy to be here today, and also very happy that this little introductory slide that I put together flows on so nicely from what Matthias and Megan have said. Clearly, I think we're coming up with it. We might have different numbers of things that we're focusing on, but the message is the same. I'm a research fellow based at NTU in Singapore, and my work very much focuses on understanding urban heat risks at local scales across Southeast Asia. I particularly focus in low-income and vulnerable communities, particularly informal settlements. As Matthias set up really nicely in his presentation, informal settlements are some of the most vulnerable groups to heat, but they are also some of these groups that we very rarely have data or information about. And this means that even though we know they're the most vulnerable, they can sort of be left behind or forgotten. So I focus on some of these really local place-based approaches to understanding heat, thinking from sort of citywide heat risk mapping to on-the-ground microclimate monitoring, to really paint the picture of what the heat people experience in the most vulnerable communities. And then from there, it's about looking at this sort of, I guess, toolbox of interventions that Matthias presented, implementing them, and then actually monitoring and evaluating the efficacy of these various adaptation measures. So that's a bit about me, and I'm very happy to dive deeper into some of these topics in the discussion today.
Thank you, Dr. Emma. May I ask Dr. Viswas?
Sure. Just can you confirm am I audible?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for this opportunity. And this is this is also to further build on what Nagin and Emma has talked about. This gives us a clear picture of how much of risk India faces to extreme heat. And we conducted this study in 2025. Those who would like to download the study, please scan the QR code right at the bottom of the slide. And this highlights that nearly 60% of districts in India are actually facing high to very high risk to extreme heat. And we had actually used a combination of 35 different variables, climatic, non-climatic, socioeconomic, health status related variables as well, to understand that how this risk exists. And then it kind of makes a solid platform to further build onto the heat resilience solutions or cooling technologies and many other bits. So this actually gives us a clear idea of where all the risk lies. But more importantly, most of these districts that are shown in red color, which are falling in very high category of heat risk, are actually rapidly urbanized districts, which means that urbanization is also equally contributing to the risk increase in the risk of extreme heat. And that's where we have to really plan our cities better. And we have to really take up the urban planning approach that Matthias talked about and also the earlier speakers have talked about in order to address the risk to extreme heat. So I will stop it here and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vishwas. May I now ask Ms. Shi if you can also share what you are going to speak.
Thank you, Imani. Please call me Shi Hui. So I'm an urban specialist at the World Bank Group based in our Singapore office, covering the East Asia and Pacific region. I think the challenge today is less about knowing what to do. I think we already have established the importance of heat and the general direction to take, but more about understanding where, for whom, and how do we actually implement these targeted solutions most effectively. So the World Bank has an ongoing urban heat management program in Bangkok, Thailand, which is one example of many. We apply a combination of analytics, policy advice, and technical assistance, working with the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration, BMA, to better understand what are the heat risks in the city, identify where the vulnerable populations are, residing in, and how do we actually translate grounded evidence into informed policy decision. So we actually launched the Shaping a Cooler Bangkok report in March last year that you see on screen, which provided the cities its first comprehensive assessment of urban heat exposure, vulnerability hotspot, and as well as a range of recommended mitigation and adaptation measures. So Bangkok is really one of the hottest cities in Asia, and I think the projection by 2050 is that there will be more than 290 hot days per calendar year, which is very significant, where the wet bulb growth temperature will be way above 30.5 degrees Celsius. So the question we wanted to critically address here is, how does heat actually affect cities, the life in Bangkok for its citizens as well as the visitors, and where do we actually focus our response? So fairly similar to the framework that Matthias spoke about earlier, our starting point was actually to approach this through the three lenses of hazard, exposure, and the vulnerability. But really, when we put together these three lenses, the message is quite clear. It's about where heat concentrates, who is exposed, who has the least capacity to cope, what that means for health, productivity, and the functioning of the city. And that understanding is what allows us to move from a broad recognition of the problem to a much targeted action. I will take a pause here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your initial reflections. So what we have heard from Dr. Matthias and from all of you, everybody knows that heat is an issue. It's a risk, and we need to address on that. Even one of the solutions, Dr. Matthias has said that we should start with a planning or mapping of the entire city and see who are vulnerable and where the risk is on that. So I just want to ask all four of you, if you can tell us, is very clear now for everyone, saying that what are the various risks attached to the heat and who are going to be the vulnerable within the city? If that is true, or is there any gap in that? So may I ask Dr. Negin, if you want to.
Yeah, that's really a good question, because in some ways we can say that we have made a lot of progress in more systematically understand some of the challenges of heat that we are facing with. We are at a time where we do have access to a lot of global data sets. We do have a lot of global models and global initiatives that are happening that has, even in the last 5 years, really transformed the way that we are looking at different cities around the world. But what is currently still lacking or fragmented is some of this local evidence and local context. So when it comes to challenges of the heat, we know that we can't just deal with global trends or what the regional models or evidence is saying. We really need to get into those lived experiences. We need to understand the context of the heat vulnerability and what are the factors, especially in people's lifestyle and in people's professions that are leading to their vulnerability. And this seems to be some of the most challenging aspects, especially because even if the evidence is existing, it can be quite fragmented from different sectors of government, from the research, or even different communities that are quite active. And in my experience, this has been one of the key gaps. That is, it's getting at that local level is what the majority of the work is really going to lead to a lot of the impact. And also, we know that some of the vulnerabilities that are existing, they are structural. There are so many equity aspects that are cascading into the heat health impact as well. And those are some of the gaps that we see, that it's a multidimensional problem that links to some of these structural inequities and vulnerabilities that we have in cities.
Thank you, Dr. Negin. I think 2 points you brought in. One is we need still local evidence. It's not that just simply say that data is there and everything is happening. And also you brought it up on the lifestyles also, this thing. Actually, it's not just only
absolutely
who is really impacted because of the heat on that. Dr. Emma, if I ask you, brought you into this discussion, what are your evidence says that actually is the lifestyle and local evidence is still needed, or do you have anything else to add here?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with Negin there. we might be able to say on paper, we know that, say, elderly folk are more vulnerable, people living in informal settlements are more vulnerable, but without sort of turning that into actionable evidence, which might look like, really like local mapping, for example, citywide mapping, which a decision maker can actually act on, that becomes a very abstract conversation otherwise. Thinking about lifestyles as well, cultural differences, even within Southeast Asia, differences between informal and formal settings. For example, someone working in an informal settlement is going to have a very different set of exposures and vulnerabilities in how they move about their day, the kind of environments they move throughout. And if we don't have data on that, then we, risk sort of these people being left behind in these great solutions that we know we have available to us. Thinking also about sort of clothing as another key example of key factor contributing to heat stress. This is super, a culturally important issue. And so, we might be sort of under or overestimating various vulnerabilities if we don't sort of think about this full picture.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think this is a good discussion happening. Dr. Viswas, I think you have done a lot of work in India, which you have shown at the district level. Do you still feel that there is a gap from the city side, that they need more data, they need more knowledge to go ahead and plan it further? What is your study says in India, actually? I know that we are talking more on ASEAN, but I am happy to listen what is happening in India also.
No, thanks, Imani. When it comes to India, and I'm sure that kind of planning process applies to many of the other South Asian and Southeast Asian countries, is something called city level heat action plan. And currently in India, CEW is partnering almost close to 300 different cities in India to support them technically to develop the heat action plans. But when we are developing the heat action plans at such a scale, of course, at the same time, we have not been able to achieve the depth that it will need to really act on specifics of it. Like, say, for example, as you mentioned, do we know where are the vulnerable settlements within these different cities? So far, we don't. Or whether we know, like, say, for migratory population, what kind of solutions are needed? We don't. So these gaps still exist, but in my view, the current level of heat action plans that we are developing, we are calling them as Heat Action Plan 1.0, which is like the very basic assessment of at landscape level, at the ward level in your city, what kind of risk to extreme heat exists, looking at the climatic patterns, looking at the building footprint patterns, and many other things. But I feel that the upcoming lot of heat action plans will definitely need to focus on going into nuances, doing the mapping of vulnerable settlements within that city, looking at what kind of solutions some cities already have implemented, taking that learning into kind of a lessons learned mode, and then looking at how do we scale it to various other cities in India. So when it comes to understanding the vulnerability or the diversity of vulnerability, I would say, because again, for senior citizens, I don't think that we have any specific solutions that can be planned for senior citizens where actually they fall in one of the vulnerable groups which get impacted by heat. So this kind of research is needed in the upcoming years. I will just add one more thing to this, that currently, we also host GHHIN's South Asia Hub, which is currently working in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Bhutan. And as you mentioned, we are actually currently doing the gap assessment for all these 4 countries to look at what is currently missing in the heat resilience landscape in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Bhutan. And we plan to launch these country synthesis briefs in October, and we'll be very happy to share it with the wider group as well for their knowledge.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Viswas. Shihui, you mentioned about the discussion about Bangkok, and you said already that more than 200 odd days of heat vulnerability is going to happen in World Bank as per the study, which you have done that in Bangkok, which you have done that. Have you identified already the vulnerable people in Bangkok as part of your study, or is there any gap still in that, in identifying who are the vulnerable people?
Thank you, Imani. I think in this case, specific to Bangkok, having a clear framework really help us to identify not just where the risks are, but also the gaps in our response. So we made quite significant progress by working with BMA and key local stakeholders to actually develop what we call a microclimate digital platform that helps to map out heat hotspots, and then we overlay with where the vulnerable populations are located in. So the diagnostic actually show that heat is not simply a public health issue. It also affects different segment of the population unequally. Outdoor workers, your low-income communities, very disproportionately actually, and it also actually create a wider economic impact through lost productivity, higher cooling demands, and also stress on critical infrastructure. I mean, given that Bangkok is the capital city where its key assets are in. So one key gap that we focus on is actually to understand where the risks are, moving from that to understanding where targeted interventions will have the greatest impact, for whom and at what scale. So the second gap that we actually pay more attention to is implementation and financing that you touched a little bit on earlier. I think we know many of the solutions, from better building design and shading to having more trees and green spaces, early warning system, etc. But these interventions often sit across different agencies, right? So this is what we found in our study in Bangkok as well. They have different sectoral focus, different budget, and heat is rarely treated as an investment priority in its own right. So it took a lot of convincing for us to convene local stakeholders to actually come together. And I think we had successes. So BMA actually formed its first working group on heat, which didn't quite occur, 2 years back. I think we need to start better integrating heat resilience into existing urban investment, strengthen that coordination across sectors, and actually develop some of this financing mechanism that can actually take interventions from pilots to city-wide scale. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for your interventions. Maybe again, if I go back in the same order, we have identified like what are the gaps about the vulnerable people. I think there is a need to be further discussion. That's what Dr. Vishwas was talking about. And the cultural issues, the lifestyle issues, the local evidence is needed further on that. Keeping all this in mind, even Dr. Matthias has suggested a few of the actions. Maybe if one by one, if you can let us know, have you seen any an action which has worked to address the heat in the cities? Somebody has told me, I think, cool rooms within the city, actually, if we can develop. Dr. Matthias has talked about maybe the white paint on the buildings, actually, on the roofs of that. And either NBS solutions, I think in the poll, it has come up, NBS is the best one. So if you can give me a good example where you have seen where it worked, and I also want to know whether we can replicate in other cities in that. Maybe can I start with Dr. Nagin again?
Sure, yeah. It's really important what you said. Its implementation is so much harder than gathering evidence, right? The implementation requires that you're thinking about all these different sectors, from your government to different communities and your research. And it's also what we talked about, this multiple timeline. The solutions that we're talking about, some are really about the long-term planning, some are about heat is here and we need to act right now. So one thing that is, I think everybody has acknowledged is first to have in mind, there's really no silver bullet when it comes to heat management solutions. We really do need to tackle this from different angles, with different sectors, with different actors involved, and like we said, with those different timelines. So I just want to point out some of these things that we have seen working, and the evidence that I'm going to mention, it comes from Australian context, as well as some of the different regions around the world. And one of them is around very simple concepts that we've talked about, blue and green infrastructure, and identifying them as critical infrastructure. So this is something that we're seeing in Australia happening, where it's not just good to have, but they are now considered as part of a critical infrastructure for any planning. And there are certain requirements about what an area, either new development or open spaces or even private, a lot of private and public interactions that are happening were to acknowledge that this is an infrastructure we need for our climate resilience. And there are certain agreements, guidelines, even budgetary and finance components that needs to go through that to make this happen. And the second one that I'm going to mention, there's a whole list of things, but this is one of my favorites, is because a lot of the solutions that we need to look at, they're not necessarily like the most technologically advanced solutions. Sometimes all we need to do is to look at our architecture from the way that it was done before we had the air conditioning, before we had all of the things that are like, you know, glass towers and some of the fancy. There was so much knowledge in that. The materials we were using, vernacular design, so many things, like a simple shade cloth that was used in a lot of arid cities around the world that would provide that thermal oasis for people as they're navigating a day. So some of the solutions that we're looking at are in fact very simple, and going back to, can we provide shade in ways that they're not these massive like steel structures, but are they're simpler, more integrated ways, and they are done in a way that we have a knowledge of where people are in the city, how do they interact with the city, how are they walking around, and we provide those points of respite. It's like thermal oasis that we create for them as they're navigating the city. So I would say this like two are like I'm sure there's a long list of things, but to me it seems like some of the solutions that tend to work regardless of the climate context, considering green infrastructure as a critical infrastructure that needs to be maintained and governed and controlled, and also looking at the design in the traditional sense that we've had and what works and what doesn't with that local context in mind.
Thank you, Dr. Nagin. Dr. Emma, is there any solution you want to suggest, or have you seen is working, not working?
Yeah, I might pick up where Nagin left off at the sort of building and household level, because I think there can be a lot of misconceptions around what works at this level, and perhaps even still uncertainties in the science of how well some of these building level solutions work. So for example, I think we all know like green roofs, green walls are super trendy at the moment, you know, especially if you walk through Singapore CBD, you've got green walls everywhere. In Bangkok as well, like I think the biggest green roof in the Southern Hemisphere, if not the world, like some really crazy green infrastructures going. And these are just really trendy, like, you know, we can list off all the benefits that we can get from these kinds of infrastructure. But thinking about heat, some of these sort of microclimate benefits can be really small. And so it's important that we don't sort of overstate these benefits either. For example, a green wall probably isn't going to do so much to cool down the outdoor temperature, unless maybe you're standing right up against the wall. There might be a tiny cooling benefit, but that extra insulation on the building and sort of extra evapotranspiration might actually be cooling down more the inside of the building and potentially reducing the energy usage. Similarly with heat reflective paints, as you mentioned, Amani, whether that's on the walkway, the pavements, the walls and roofs, there's a bit of mixed evidence out there at the moment. We're seeing some trials coming out of Singapore at the moment, as well as in other parts of Southeast Asia. And, you know, the benefit that we get, again, it depends on the time of day, on the building materials, on whether we're painting the roof or the walls, whether those walls are facing, you know, a direction that gets a lot of sunshine during the day. So it's, again, it's not a one size fits all, but it's about understanding sort of the variation in benefit that we might get. And then I guess that becomes like a cost benefit calculation to make, right, in terms of how big the benefit is, and then also how we can sort of combine these in a more sort of landscape style of thinking, as Nagin was saying, to maximize that benefit across a city.
Dr. Viswas, you want to add, like after analysis in 300-hour districts you're talking about, or cities you're talking about, have you seen any action happening in Indian cities, and which can be as an example to the ASEAN cities?
Yeah, So actually, when we started working with the Indian cities in late 2023, we also wanted to, in parallel, document some evidence on different kinds of heat resilience solutions that work. And again, our effort was to capture and document the evidence. However, we were only able to come to the conclusion that only 5 solutions are most prominently seen. Some of them are already talked about by Nagin and Emma. Some of them include like cool roofs or green roofs. Reflective paints is one of the kind of prominent solution that we have seen. But also when it comes to some of the solutions which have been implemented in public spaces is also something called cooling shelter or cooling stations that we have seen. There are various forms of it, like some of them work on, which are called net zero cooling shelters. They work on renewable energy technology and they don't need any additional supply of electricity. But also we have seen that there is also a lot of frugal innovation that has also happened in this space, where like agencies like Mahila Housing Trust has implemented a cool bus stop in the city of Ahmedabad, which often sees temperatures exceeding 40 to 43 degrees Celsius in the months of summer. But the challenge here is that again, all of it is not really documented in one place, and that is one of the challenges that we are facing in terms of also understanding what kind of challenges they have faced while implementing it. Because if you want to put up a solution on the ground, even if it is a public land, there are several complications that go with it. If it is a public building where you want to do retrofitting, there are several permissions that you need to take before you really attempt to do that. So these kind of challenges do exist. So in a nutshell, even if these kind of solutions exist, if we are to really capture on what kind of challenges they face, so that the other agencies who are trying to do it in the other cities might want to address these kind of issues like kind of head on, and also to scale it and contextualize it, it will become very important to look at some of the evidence in form of the technical kind of data as well. And just to add, I have shared a YouTube video series that we had done with social media influencers, because our aim was also to popularize these solutions in a wider community. So I have shared the link in the chat. Please feel free to view it whenever convenient. Thank you.
Sure. Shihui, anything to be added from the Bangkok? I know I was talking to the Bangkok colleagues in April, the BMA team. They have told me that during the heat, as an early warning system, each and every whichever area is going to be impacted, all the citizens will get a message actually from the health services. I think that's one thing Bangkok is implementing already in that. So is there anything that's an early warning system? I also was told that there are some cool stations or cooling stations, what as Viswas was talking about, is also implemented in some of the places in Bangkok. Anything else you have seen happening in Bangkok which can be taken up as an example by other cities in ASEAN countries?
Thank you, Imani. I think extreme heat is a widespread challenge across cities, but actually the urban heat island effect that we are looking at within Bangkok is actually highly localized. So this means that the response needs to be very tailored to the specific context and asset of each city. I think a key part of our work with BMA was to identify what are the existing resources that BMA already has. So you mentioned about cooling centers. So BMA owns and operates over 400 public schools across the city, and many of which has been kind of converted into cooling centers, particularly during the hot season from March to June, which happens to kind of coincide with the school holiday period as well. So that's very convenient. So opening up air-conditioned classroom can provide much needed respite at relatively low cost and can be done very easily, particularly in communities where many households do not have access to air conditioning. So the Air BKK app that you mentioned, actually a lot of residents in Thailand use it to monitor the PM 2.5 situation. And BMA has actually integrated the heat index into this existing app. So there was no reason for them to provide another app. There's too many apps on our mobile phone these days. So just one that's integrated where residents can actually get access to information about how warm is it today, what kind of precaution they need to take. And I guess one reflection would be that sometimes seemingly complex challenges can actually be addressed through surprisingly very simple and practical solutions. So BMA is looking critically at providing more hydration points at key transit nodes and high traffic areas, covered walkways along important pedestrian routes, or even shaded rest stops, right, for some of the bus stops, and also areas where delivery riders can actually take a break while they wait for their orders to be ready. So I think the key point here is not always to build on something new, but to identify the existing resources, make use of what already exists, and target interventions where they can make the greatest difference. Thank you.
Okay, so just thanks for giving that all the actions what each city can do and how many are, which are the ones are working or not working in the cities. Some of them are low cost solutions, some of them are cost wise solutions on that. Looking into all this, my question at the beginning when I was talking about, I asked like, not all cities have money, frankly speaking. Okay. They need some money. I know that some of them are low cost solutions, but some of them, they need money actually. Even if they want to convert a school into a cooling room or a cool station, some of the governments need money on that. Is there anywhere, like how do they tap the money? Is there any fund available anywhere, you know that, where? Or is there any other solution you think that always I'm working in the climate action field for the last 30 odd years. I always used to tell the city governments, please start work from your own money. Whatever is there in your pocket, please take it out and start implementing and looking for funds from the outside world actually on that. That is the principle is still going to work, or is there any money available on that? Maybe I'll start with World Bank first, maybe in a reverse order this time. Shuhui, do you think that cities can get some money from where? And if I don't know how much time we have, but maybe if I add one more point to this on the governance thing, Dr. Matthias has said that what type of governance structures we should have in the cities so that they can implement some actions on ground on that. So these two questions I just want to ask, and I will start with Shuhui from the World Bank.
Thank you, Imani, for the
Sorry
really
to put you on
challenging
the spot.
question. No worries. For a city like Bangkok, I think financing for heat resilience will need to come from a combination of sources. I don't think like there will be one avenue that can fully finance this. So the first and most important source is actually domestic public finance, embedding heat resilience into existing investment in public health, transport, buildings, parks, your infrastructure. It's not just one area. So this can then be complemented by multilateral and climate finance, including concessionary finance and grants. So the study that we're actually working on in Bangkok is also financed by a trust fund, the Global Facility for Disaster Risk Management and Reduction. I think that's very important. There's also significant potential to actually bring in private capital, for example, through incentives such as green buildings, energy efficiency, cooling, and PPPs. So I think that ultimately the objective is actually to move from financing individual heat projects to actually mainstreaming heat resilience into the city's broader investment pipeline. Right? You mentioned about governance and partnership. That's very critical. I think heat sits at the nexus of many sectors: health, planning, environment, transport, etc. No single agency and certainly no single institution can actually address it alone. So we definitely need stronger collaboration between governments, academia, private sector, communities, as well as development partners. So this is also where international organizations like the World Bank ourselves can actually add value, and also what AIT CLARE-ASEAN is doing, bring in convening global operational experience, technical expertise, cross-country learning, which is very important because I think even though heat is so localized, but the lessons that we learn from other regions are also adaptable. I think ultimately the strongest way to actually make a case for action is to frame heat not as a climate risk, but an investment in healthier and more productive as well as competitive cities. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Viswas?
Yeah, thanks. So when it comes to India, like India has something called National Disaster Risk Management Fund. And generally, this happens in terms of devolutions to states through something called a finance commission, which has been running in India since 1952. Currently, we are in the 16th Finance Commission that started on April 1st, 2026, and which will be active for next 5 years. And actually, CAW team got a chance to work with the 16th Finance Commission team in order to actually share some of the scientific evidence on the topic of heat waves as well. And like India so far had 12 national notified disasters. Now India has recognized heat waves and lightning as a nationally notified disaster as well, which opens up the kind of the whole pot of money, which is kind of I think 30 billion US dollars, if I'm not wrong, which is 2 lakh crore Indian rupees, which will be available for next 5 years for all the states to use for. But so far, of course, in the Indian context, floods and landslides have been most prominent disasters in the case of India, where most of the finance used to be channelized. But with this notification of heat waves as a nationally notified disaster, it gives an immense opportunity to various cities and districts to develop their own proposals on heat mitigation programs. And even at the state level as well, if they want to develop kind of something like heat wave management fund, which will notify particular actions across heat wave prone cities in the Indian context. So I feel this kind of finance is of course available. In addition to this, since the urban local bodies have their own administration in the Indian context, they can also very well use their own budget for allocation of finance for heat wave management. And we had seen that when we worked with Thane city, they had allocated sum of Indian rupees of 1 crore rupees for heat and flood risk management issues in the city. So this is also possible. Apart from that, I mean, what is more important is also to look at the convergence of various public schemes at the state and national level to look at from where all this kind of finance can be unlocked.
Thank you. Dr. Emma, you want to add further on that?
I'll add very briefly. I think Shihui really nailed the big picture there. But to just, as an academic, it's so important that all of these great projects are collaborating with scientists in academia so that we are learning as we're doing, right? We don't have time to sort of do these two things separately anymore. So let's learn as we go, collect data as we go, and so that we sort of progressively get better and better and really, thinking about these kinds of action research projects like we're seeing out of CLARE and ASEAN.
Dr. Nagin, thank you, Dr. Emma.
Yeah, a lot of it is already covered. I would just maybe highlight two things that was mentioned. One was we heard about transferability, that there's a lot of lessons, but there are also a lot of methods and tools that can be transferable. And this just means that we need to be more intentional about them. We can't just say, like, we've developed something and now let's just transfer it to a new context with the resources. It really needs to be in that initial phase of planning and initial phase of development, the data, of the tools, of the frameworks. How can this be transferred across different contexts, climates, city types, and so on? And there are quite a lot of international organizations like WMO, for example, and others that are really taking this into account in a more systematic way that we've done previously, which, and also there are some AI movements that are helping us understand, like, if we can really leverage and transfer what we've learned from one place to another. I did mention this in the previous episode, but it directly links to your question about like financing. There are a lot of areas that I feel like we still need to explore in terms of private and public partnerships. There is a lot that we need to develop that is more from the governance and community, but there are also people that are themselves interested in understanding if there are some private properties, private developments, like what are the ways that these can be climate resilient or heat resilient? And there are lessons to be learned there. The incentive is not just climate resilience. It could be energy saving. It could be like certain costs going down, future planning for like, your asset being protected in 2 decades to come, things like that. But I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned about how we can incentivize people to invest in ways that are looking at multiple incentives than one. I wanted to leave it there, but I would also, again, maybe just sneak in another point about the community engagement of things. There's a lot we can do with a lot of finance is needed if you want to do long-term planning, urban design, governance, all of that. But if the resources are constrained, I would say the community aspects of it, making sure that community is aware, that making sure that they themselves are enabled to take the action to reduce their own risks becomes really a critical component that should be really priority and not just secondary in our planning.
Thank you. Thanks a lot to all the four panelists. I think very rich discussion. I don't want to summarize anything, maybe I think because the time is very short here. But I just want to add a few other points. I think thanks to IDRC CLARE Opportunity Fund, actually ICLI is also doing few programs in Nepal, Maldives, India, and Philippines, and Indonesia also. Thanks to all the city governments who are participating in that, and thanks to IDRC. So few examples are there. We are also looking into the nature-based solutions, and we are also looking into the local action plans, La Paz in Nepal and Maldives and other countries actually. So this is another example which I just want to add here on that. And once again, thank you to all the panelists for the rich discussion, and I will just hand it over back to the organizers.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Imani, and our wonderful panelists for taking us through such an important and insightful discussion. So once again, in case of any questions or reflections regarding the panel discussion, please feel free to use the Q&A box. And I'm sure our presenters as well as panelists will try to address as many of them as possible. So before we move into Q&A segment, shortly we will do our last poll for the audience. So for that, I would request my colleague to please generate the poll once again. So this poll is basically about understanding the enablers and implementation strategies, which our audience feel is important. So in terms of main barriers to scaling up urban heat solutions in ASEAN, there is financing gaps and poor allocation of climate funds as the major barrier, but it's going up and down. So following that, we also have weak policy frameworks and government coordination. Following that, we have rapid urbanization and dense land use constraints, and then limited technology access and localized heat data. So about the stakeholder group who needs to take the strongest leading role to drive urban heat adaptation, it is for sure city and local governments with the 81% of audience thinking this way. And then we have national governments, academic institutions and scientific research, community-based organization and residents, and then the private sector. Okay. So we really have an interesting result here. So I'll not take much time with the poll, and we shall move into the Q&A segment now. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. So with this, we now move into the Q&A segment. And for this, I'd like to request Professor Sobhakar Takal to kindly take over.
Thank you, Sumnima. I think we have a little sort of time, so what I'll try to do, I think thank you also for many of our speakers that they have already answered several questions in the Q&A. So what I'll do is that I'll just pick maybe one representative question from this remaining question, and I'll give a very quick a chance to speaker to reflect on this. So let me first start with Professor Matthias Roth. Professor Matthias Roth, thank you so much for answering several questions that also I saw in the chat box. There are many questions, but let me ask you one question that has come up in the interest of time. There are some questions that how do heat risk how to integrate history to the existing risk management. There are lots of risk already happening, so now we have to add one more risk as a heat risk, and especially for the critical infrastructure such as hospitals and others, how that integrating additional heat risk would play out, and what can we do about it? Is this a representative question? Just one question in the interest of time. Professor Matthias Roth.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, I'm surprised that, maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but it's great to see there's so many questions, and they're really insightful questions, quite a few of them, and difficult to answer. So I've been busy during the last half hour or so trying to answer some of these. Yeah, and I think I've also answered this one already in the Q&A, or to some extent. But I think heat risk is just one of the other risks, right? And then we have to take a decision which risk is more important, because heat risk is not the only risk that's facing us as urban dwellers. So I don't know who should do this. The city government or whoever should decide which risk is more important. But as we do know, heat kills people, so it should have a high priority. That specific question was also about sort of critical infrastructure, such as hospitals and probably others as well, which are critical within the urban social ecosystem. I think what I answered there as well is, when it comes to these kind of critical infrastructures, maybe we have to relax a little bit in terms of, okay, these infrastructures should be totally sustainable. They should use passive cooling and whatever. I think we have to make an exception. Let's say for hospitals, they should be able to go ahead with maybe fewer interventions than others, just to be able to protect their workers and their patients.
Thank you, Professor Matthias. Thank you so much. I know that there are many interesting questions, and in the interest of time, we couldn't take it up, and hopefully our audience will reach out to you. I think all of you are globally known researchers. It won't be very difficult to reach out. So one question to Negan. Negan, there is a question regarding land surface temperature. Would you like to address that question?
Sure, yeah. So this is one of those really interesting areas, because I am trying to answer questions that are asking like about data, how much data we need, like what do we need, and I'm trying to summarize that we need the data on hazards, how hot it is, when, and then like we need data on who is exposed to it because of their lifestyle, and also who is vulnerable, right? So the first one, you say hazard, we have global data sets, and one of them is land surface temperature. It comes from satellite, it's covering around the world. That sounds like that should be addressing a lot of our demand for data, but unfortunately, this is something that we need to, it's a cautionary tale of, it's really important to think about not just how much data we have or how much data we need. Nobody's advocating that we need all the data before we act. In fact, there's a lot that we can act on before we even having data, but it is important that we have the right data. And the land surface temperature is a really good example of that, because we know from evidence gathered from around the world that in fact, what the satellite sees is not what the people in the cities are experiencing. The satellite is seeing the top of the tree, it's seeing the rooftops, and the more the city is dense, the more that relationship between the land surface temperature and the air temperature becomes decoupled. It means that if you look at the maps of like the hottest spots of the land surface temperature, it may not agree with what is the hottest spots of air temperature. So there is a bit of a cautionary tale in there, is that yes, there are certain data sets that are available globally, but they're not the most fit for purpose for the heat management. It doesn't mean they are useless. There are definitely certain uses that we can think of. And like one good example is that when we want to look at the long-term trends, average over a city, and understand how our cities is warming, for example, land surface temperature can be useful. But if you're trying to decide where to strategically put different solutions, actions in the cities, land surface temperature needs to really be used with caution, because like I said, it can be really decoupled with air temperature. So there are, I think I can point out to some publications in the responses that I'm writing that spell that out a little bit more. But like I said, it's really about not just having data, but making sure that data is fit for purpose for the solution or the scale that we are trying to address.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you so much. I know that we are rushing against time. So one minute, Emma. Emma, there are lots of technical questions, especially if you can address one question in maybe 30 seconds or maximum 1 minute, that how to put a weight to different risks. There are different indicators to designate, risk and vulnerability. So anything regarding, some kind of criteria for putting different weights to these risk indicators. Sorry that I'm putting you pressure of maybe 30 seconds or 45 seconds.
Yeah, a lot of pressure, especially when the answer to all good science questions is it depends. So a good risk indicator would include some aspects of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. So it's capturing the full picture of risk. Exactly what those indicators are within the three categories and the weights given to them is going to be context dependent. So that's probably the best answer I can give in this small time frame. But certainly there's a big body of research out there about this.
Thank you, Emma. Biswas, one quick question regarding climate justice, right? I know that time is very short, but how to protect vulnerable groups? Any quick 30 seconds, reflection on how to protect the vulnerable groups and this issue of the climate justice?
Yeah, just wanted to know if am I audible? Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So in terms of vulnerable groups, I think it is important to, first of all, do the mapping of these settlements within the city, which will identify where exactly the informal settlements are. But also, I think a lot of it will need community-centric action and a lot of ground-up kind of approach to collect this data. And then on the basis of the data and on the basis of the risks, then the further solutions can be developed for vulnerable categories of groups.
Thank you, Biswas. Last quick question to Sihui. Sihui, I think there is one very interesting question there regarding trade-off between short-term survival solutions, such as need for air conditioner to survive urban heat, versus long-term habitability, which actually might go against the use of air conditioning. So how to make a trade-off? Any quick thought, 30 seconds, thoughts on short-term versus long-term issue? How to handle that?
Yeah, so this is an issue that we contend with regarding anthropogenic heat from the use of AC. So unfortunately, in the humid climes in Southeast Asia, it's inevitable. People go to shopping mall just to get a respite. So I would say a suite of interventions, low-hanging fruits, things that you can implement very quickly, but you also need your longer-term, medium to longer-term intervention that cause a strategic shift in investment in infrastructure, your green spaces, larger parks, even pocket parks that are accessible to homes within 15 minutes radius. So we can't rule out one or the other. We need to use it at different times by different players and as a part of a combination. Thank you.
Thank you, Sihui. Thank you so much. I think yeah, we have a feedback form which our colleagues will flash on your screen. Please do fill up that form. I think we are at the very end segment, and what I'll do is to invite three colleagues, Dr. Jiranuch, Dr. Dian, and also to give a closing remarks to Dr. Aryan Dihan from IDRC. Dr. Dian and Dr. Jiranuch, they are also carrying out CLARE-ASEAN Action Research Project on the ground. Dr. Dian, can we have very quick reflection, maybe in 3 minutes from you on key takeaways?
Okay, thank you, Professor Sobakar. Thank you so much for all the panelists and Professor Matias for the keynote speak. And I think what we've learned through our research has been resonate with what you have been sharing in this webinar. And I'm representing a group of researchers across Indonesia and Malaysia, where we do research on comparing the impact of urban heat to the two type of housing, which is landed housing and vertical housing, or what we call public housing, across cities in Indonesia and Malaysia. And then throughout this research, we've learned a lot, but we've learned a few things that quite resonate with what you've been expressing earlier. For example, like vulnerability is major factors that we've learned with these people living in informal settlements. They've been exposed to more hazard because they've been vulnerable, and therefore their adaptive capacity has been limited, mostly by structural barrier. For example, like about land tenure securities, or there's no lacking of supporting systems in the neighborhood in terms of infrastructures. And then, but however, despite all this existing hazard and then the prominent vulnerability, the people also do something, try to adapt and mitigate the urban heat through organic actions and organized actions. We've learned throughout the research that people have been collectively try to manage or adapt the urban heat through passive coolings. They improve their housing through cooperatives, and also try to greenering their neighborhood, try to mitigate the urban heat. I've learned that I think we can, to add what Professor Matias has proposed earlier, that we can improve is to first to encourage or endorse collective management against this humid heat, meaning that in terms of communities, that what we've been doing in Indonesia is to promote cooperatives in the communities. And then second is to have intervention in terms of structural systems, that these informal settlements have this prominent issue in terms of land tenure securities. And for those who live in public housing in Indonesia and Malaysia, they have issues in terms of period of living, and that's actually influencing how they can adapt. And then the third is how we can put people on the center. And then throughout our research actions, we've learned that when we put people in the centers in terms of research, participatory research, then we through the process have exposed the people mainstreaming the issue of urban heat, and then improve the awareness of the people itself. We have method like heat diary, and where people by themselves identifying the heat within a week period, and then where particularly women can also advocate for their needs and interests to their husbands. So it is very interesting experience. And through participatory actions, we've also learned that through the cooperative, people can actually collecting fund and then improve their housings, and then using this mechanism as revolving fund to adapt. So I think Negini have shown the table, right, where the short terms and then long term. I think what we've seen in the urban poor in both Indonesia and Malaysia, they've been trying this effort within this range, right? They try to short terms, mid terms, long terms at the same times, because they cannot fully rely to the governments at this time because of their status. And I think that is quite significant input from our research. And another thing is that on our based on our research, we also want to produce like a toolkit where based on the experience of the urban poor living in informal settlements and in public housing, they can actually provide input to the governments, what kind of improvements in terms of housing and buildings that can basically improve the adaptive capacity to urban heat. Yeah, that's it, Professor Sabakar. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share, and then also to learn from all the panelists, and then from Professor Matias. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dian. May I invite Dr. Jiranut Sakamduang from Thailand Environment Institute. She is also one of our research leads on heat and heat management in Greater Mekong sub-region. Dr. Jiranut, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor Baka. I think 3 minutes is very challenging. So as Professor Chobaka mentioned, I'm the lead researcher on the project called Heat Adaptation for the Mekong region, or HAMMER. So the HAMMER is working on urban heat in Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. So our goal is to provide policy recommendation for policymakers at the city level based on the co-creation research. We produce an urban heat map, urban heat risk framework, and policy recommendation by working with governmental agency as well as community and researcher. My impression here first is that in this room, in this webinar, all the speakers and audience, there are researchers and people who work or at least interested in urban heat. So we know what is urban heat and its impact. But from our project, when we talk with people, with all stakeholders, we found that it's like their lack of awareness and understanding on the impact of urban heat. Either a governmental agency, or other stakeholders. So it is highlight the importance of a high quality research to serve or support policymaker in terms of urban heat. And for the key takeaway that I try to capture from this webinar as well as mixing with our project result is that it's very interesting because I quote from our first speaker that no one solution fits all. We have to work within the context of each city. But from our project, what we found that in Southeast Asia, urban heat should be identified as disaster, same as flood and drought, for stronger action from government. And then it can come to early warning system. And then urban heat action plan at city level, targeting supporting vulnerable groups such as elderly, women with pregnancy, children, low-income people, outdoor workers, or people who live in informal areas can be done. And now come to my last key takeaway. It's very important because it's about money. So I can capture that there are some of speakers suggest that we should use the existing resource or traditional knowledge or low-cost solution in terms of working that fit to each context of each cities. And also we think the budget of urban heat investment should integrate in the existing government initiative or in the government project pipeline. And I also can capture that we should focus more on public-private partnership. And the last one is we still have interested in innovative finance mechanism to tackle urban heat, such as parametric heat insurance for vulnerable groups. Yes, that's all for my key takeaway. And over it to Professor Chobakar or Ms. Sumina. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jiranus. Thank you so much, all the speakers. We are at the very end of our webinar. On the screen, you see the feedback form. Please do click that and please send us the feedback form. I'll now like to invite Dr. Aryan Dihan from International Development Research Center, IDRC, Canada, in order to give the final remarks and also close the webinar. Aryan, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, colleagues. When I was listening to Dr. Dina, I said, like, the learning in this webinar has been really fantastic. I was going to say it's heartwarming, but given that we're talking about urban heat, we should invent a new term for that. This was a heart cooling webinar, I think, in terms of the learning that's provided. I think the messages are very, very clear. We know that the problem is there, that it's now and it needs solutions now, but also that does not mean that we have all the right data. There is a continued need for specifying precisely the problems and how local these are. I heard very good frameworks, including kind of the sequencing of activities. And there too, I think it's and everybody used them slightly different in 3 or in 6 steps. But there's very good learning here and a consensus about what we need to do. The examples that the panel provided, I think, are really, really important. I remember somebody said how can they best be documented, and also the process of learning, I think, is really important. One of the references that Imani made to that work that included city officials from Nairobi, I believe, coming to a city in India to learn. And this was learning between the peers that are implementing that. And I think groups like us have very important roles, yes, to document the good experience, but also think about how the learning can best happen. And I think the priority around implementation and scaling, that is also very, very clear. There's a consensus that we need to do more on that. I think the point about, and I think Sean made that point, integrating this into existing systems, frameworks of governance is really important. The collaboration is important. The search for simple, where they are simple, underbuilt by good evidence, simple solutions are really, really important. And finally, then, and that's where the last two speakers spoke so very nicely about in that ongoing research, is to make sure that the research connects to evidence on the builds policymakers, but also that research gets into the hand of local communities and local officials, because that in the end is where the action happens. So the learning about these topics are absolutely fabulous. AIT, thank you so much for this work. Wonderful. Thank you to all the speakers and everybody who joined in that, all the questions. Thank you very, very much indeed. And we hope you will join us again at the next webinar as well. Thank you. Back to Sunima, maybe you will close us off.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Aryan, and also Professor Dr. Dia and Dr. Giranul for all those insightful remarks. And with that, we come to the end of our today's webinar. On behalf of the organizing team, I would like to sincerely thank all of our speakers, panelists, and all of you for joining us today. And please do also fill up that feedback form so that we would know what can we improve or what did we do best for this webinar. We hope you found the discussion insightful and useful. Thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events. Have a wonderful day.